Good morning, Coffee Chat friend. There was an old song that once had a line in it that said, "If I make it through December, things are gonna be alright." Gonna be alright, I know. Forget who sung it, but I think it's very appropriate on this early January day because we have a new brightening year to look forward to. Today's topic, of course, not of course, but rather dreary, maybe in a way, is about losing our fear of death. Now you might say, Steve, come on, surely there's something a little bit better that you can come up with today on this time when things are supposed to get going again. Well, I don't know, I've been thinking about doing this for a while because I was talking to a friend of mine not long ago and the topic of nihilism came up. And I spoke rather not in favor of the concept of nihilism, although I am of the mind that most words, most concepts, most things have a silver lining to them in a way. And I think that this concept of nihilism is something that there is something to it. I mean, if we kind of have an empty feeling for a bit, we can then allow some concepts to come into our consciousness that we might not have thought of before. And one of these things is the examination of this thing called death. I mean, it's huge, I believe, and it holds us back from so many things because very often the root of what's holding us back, if we go beyond the things we talked about with motivations and all this sort of thing, if we really look deep, there's a fear. It's a fear that holds us back from a lot of things. And one of those deepest fears is death itself. So imagine if we were to lose that fear, what it would be like. Now, why would we fear death? Well, for sure there's got to be the horror stories we were told about hell and purgatory and limbo and whatever else, that eternal torture or judgment or these sorts of things. These are taught to us by people who've got no evidence for it, but they're taught anyways as truths, and they get deep-seated as possibilities in the minds of many. And then there's the superficial things that we could say are leading to that sensation of loss in some way, maybe not loss of life, but loss of status in a community, which is a partial part of our experienced life anyway. Injury, so loss of part of our physical injury, emotional injury, getting burned, getting hurt in love, these sorts of things. All of these things create resistance to us wanting to move forward. But getting in touch with this thing of the inevitability of death. In other words, well, first of all, one of the things that I think is helpful is one thing I heard by Christopher Hitchens say one time, that I think it was Christopher Hitchens. He said that life is basically it's already a losing battle. I mean, we're all individually, we're all on the way to death, if you will. I mean, that's part of the life cycle, right? Birth, life, death. So it's already a losing battle. So his point is, let's get used to it. Let's just live that is inevitable. So how is it productive to fear it? It's coming anyway. And I remember also my brother, when he passed away a number of years ago, talking to him a few weeks before, when he had finally, it seemed like he completely reconciled this reality. I mean, that was going to happen. It was very imminent for him. And we were talking about something, I forget what it was something like world affairs or finances or economy, recession or something it was. And his comment eventually was, what does it really matter? What does it really matter? All of these sort of things we construct, and because he had at a certain point resigned himself and therefore lost his fear of that inevitability, a lot of other things just sort of fell away, and he was truly living almost on a grander level with that inevitability of death than anybody else, because he could be very honest with it. It's quite amazing. Another thing that I came across one time, I was reading the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, who was some sort of a Roman governor at the time when the tail end of the Roman Empire, when they were fighting the Goths or whoever they were, constantly at war anyway. And he wrote all these little meditations, and it was a good little book. But one of them was, he talked about in there about how how would one live if you only had a couple of days to live? Would you live differently? And what would that life look like? And so he was, and his point after making that comment is that in reality that's what we're all experiencing every day. We only have individually a few days to live, so why are we not living as though we are dying? Because that's in fact what we are. And by getting in touch with that, the sting or the worry of and the attachment to what we have as this transient experience of life kind of falls away, and it becomes more, death becomes more real, and therefore life becomes more real, because that's part of the cycle. It's like we're admitting, we're getting in touch with it, and we're just going to live life now, not so much pretending, right? Because there's one more thing that we've accepted as real, so we're living life of less pretension. So I think losing the fear of death, or working on that at least, and losing some of that fear of death, helps us improve the quality of our life experience, because now we can truly live. And also realizing that that's inevitable, and that if we're honest with ourselves, we really don't know if the stories that we were told about the afterlife and all this stuff are actually have any validity whatsoever. We don't really know that. And if we're honest with ourselves, I'm talking about, we're not going to argue with somebody as to whether those things are or not true. I don't have any evidence for it, and I don't know. Nobody's ever presented me with any evidence that this is true. So what we do know, though, is that we're experiencing life now. And if we realize that this experience, even if there is afterlife, it doesn't really matter, but this experience of living in this individual expression, it becomes extremely precious, because it is finite, it is transient. And all of the experience that we have through our sight, smell, sound, our intuition, our friendships, relationships, all of that takes on it can take almost like an incandescent experience, because we realize, wow, we have this. It's absolutely precious. I have life. And therefore, even from momentary nihilistic experiences, we can snap back and say, oh, smokes, get on with it, dude. I have life here. And this is amazingly precious. From the nihilistic perspective of nothingness, to being able to smell and see and all that sort of thing in that moment of awakening to that expression, is like an infinite expression, an infinite experience of fullness and opportunity to explore and to move forward, all that sort of thing. I think that losing that fear and just getting on with life, of enjoying, losing the fear, or at least reducing the fear, lets us get on with experiencing the life now. Because after all, if we're going to be fearful about death and those sort of things, that's projecting ourselves into this future inevitability. But what about the now? And every time we project ourselves into a future inevitability, just as kind of a distraction or a fear or phobia or whatever it is, we are, to the extent that we're doing that, distracting ourselves from the moment of now and enjoying the moment of now, the living moment of now. I would say then that, though it may sound like a rather gloomy topic, I think it's important, because it does statistically, and there's research on this about how many people are fearful of death. Now, why that is, there's lots of reasons for it. I think a lot of it has to do with childhood trauma and being told superstitious stories, which are extremely scary stories. I remember the stories that I was told were very scary, as well as just the incremental, rejection, the fear of getting old and not looking as good, and people thinking you're this or that. All of those sort of things are incremental to the inevitable of actually no longer being here individually. Those are all fears that we come across. But you know what? When we accept it, when we realize, when we really just think about it through our reasoning process, that everything else goes through the process. A blade of grass grows up, starts off as a little wee sprig that we see in the spring. It grows nice and tall, or it gets cut off, and if it's left, it just turns brown and falls down. I mean, that's kind of what happens to us individually, so why not get used to it? The afterlife stories and all that, we can basically leave that alone, because I don't know what's got anything to do with living now. If we're going to live now, we're going to live now. And we might as well live with the evidence that we have, which is that we are alive now. We do have capacities. We do have the expression, a will to walk over there if we want to, or talk to people, all of these sorts of things, to use our whatever capacity our faculties do have to create, to explore, to help ourselves to improve the quality of our life experience. I think it's wonderful. I think it's wonderful to embrace the inevitability, because if for no other reason, it helps us to enjoy what we do have, which surely, in terms of just the measurement up from nothing to the concept of nothing to the experience of what we have, is dramatic, and it's the experience of life is, to me, is to be celebrated. Hope this is helpful for this beginning of 2015. My name is Steve, and I hope that you can live life on a more enjoyable level in this year. Bye-bye for now.